Hey guys, as I promised, I decided to make top 10 my favorite decks in all of Gwent. Now this is my opinion, so I'm very interested what are your favorite decks. Also, I'll be limiting myself to only one deck per archetype, and I will be excluding Witcher 3 Gwent. So let's get started. So at number 10 I decided on a Smuggler deck from Gwent Open Beta. The plan with this deck was that you first discarded the Raider who got summoned when he was discarded, and then you buffed his base power as much as you were able to. Then after he went to the graveyard you were able to put really strong Raider back in the deck, and then discard him again with Lugos for a huge damage, and he also got summoned again. The deck was more of a meme because buffing him was a low tempo play and the opponent could easily pass when you were down a lot of points, but it was still a fun deck to play. At number 9 we have Gwent Open Beta Gravehack deck. Gravehack had the same ability as Mortart now. It's basically the same card with the exception of that her ability triggered instantly when she was summoned. Now why didn't I choose Homecoming Mortart or Closed Beta? Well, in Closed Beta it was a bit too powerful even though you had to wait one turn like now. But it was a problem that all the units that spawned went to the graveyard, and the card was in the top tier deck, which is always negative to the enjoyment of the card with me. Also, there wasn't as much removal back then as it is now. While Homecoming Gravehack might be more meme than in Open Beta, it's also really hard to play because of so many removal cards. Open Beta didn't get as big of the graveyard, but it was also playable. Other than that, the card was always fun to make the deck around it. At number 8 I decided to put 40 card Foltest deck from Open Beta. Now this deck had a really fun concept. Basically you played 40 cards and the leader Foltest had the ability to boost all units in your deck by 1, while Hubert had the ability to drain the deck of all of its boosts. So you basically played 40 cards to be able to play a really strong card as a finisher. The deck wasn't really that bad by itself either. Because there is a lower chance to draw the cards that you needed to keep in the deck, you could afford to play more deck thinning cards, and also blacklisting was the thing back then. Which for those of you who don't know, it basically means that you can't draw the same copies of the card that you just mulliganed in the same mulligan phase. 40 card deck was a really interesting concept that sadly isn't possible anymore because of the provisions, and because it can't really be that consistent with 40 cards, it's usually not top tier. But the deck was still decently strong and very fun to play. At number 7 we have probably the only deck from Homecoming on this list, and that is Nilfgaard Meal deck. While Closed Beta didn't have Meal as an option, and Open Beta Meal was at some point too frequently used, and because of that I never liked Meal decks. But at Homecoming the Meal deck was made a meme because it wasn't as easy to meal the opponent, and firstly it was still a bit too weak until Mata and Damien were released. That's when I started liking Meal decks. The meal is pretty fun concept, and it's basically a unique win condition by mealing opponent to 0 cards. The reason why meal isn't higher on the list is because it's one of those decks that playing against it is really annoying, but when you're the one playing it, it's really fun. Sadly, after they removed the replay leader, the meal archetype was almost completely killed. At number 6 we have one of those decks that I wish CDPR expanded upon instead of removing it, and that deck is Nilfgaard Reveal. Seeing cards that opponent has in the hand and showing your cards to the opponent is a very interesting concept. I would probably put the Nilfgaard Reveal at number 1 if the archetype was expanded upon and made even more interesting, but sadly they completely removed it in Homecoming. Well, there are exactly 2 cards left with Reveal, which are in the Homecoming, and those are Imperial Golem and Spotter, but they sadly never implemented the archetype in the Homecoming. So this deck was only really present in Open Beta. Now I'll let my old self explain the deck to you. The deck revolves around revealing cards. You can use Henry to reuse Fire Scorpions, With Stefan Skellen you usually want to put Henry or a gold on the top, and spotters can be really strong if Cynthia revealed a really strong unit or if you have Nilfgaardian Knight or Cantorella revealed. So here's the deck guys, enjoy it! So yeah, the archetype was very interesting and fun to play, which is why it's number 6 on my list. At number 5 I probably have a bit of controversial deck for those who played Gwent in closed beta, and this deck is no other than Squirtle Ambush Shiro deck. Now yes, I know that this was a top tier deck at its time and it was everywhere. Also Ambush was a bit too much dependent on mind reading. You basically won and lost based on if the ambush was buffed up Toroville or a non-buffed Kieran. And Squirtle card advantage ability made this even a lot worse. Which basically lets you choose which player starts the turn first, and if Squirtle won the first turn, it could let you go first in round 2 and you just had to play on because you had to win that round. And then there was a constant buffing of Toroville in hand. You basically gave it to the opponent with Operator after that and had more and kill opponent's Toroville. Unbuffed Kieran was a 1-point ambush that had basically the same ability as Siri. Both Toroville and Kieran only activated when opponent passed, so if you put down Kieran and opponent played on, he was at huge disadvantage for round 3. But if he passed, he still had a chance to negate that disadvantage because Toroville couldn't be played after opponent passed. But if the ambush card was Toroville instead of Kieran, well then the opponent just lost the game. The reason why I liked the deck was exactly because of the mind games, although playing against it was horrible, but the main reason why I liked this deck was Shiro. Basically, when the special card was played, he negated that special card and scorched the strongest opponent's unit. But if no special cards were played, you got 0-point card basically, because he didn't trigger. You could activate him by playing your own special card, but the most fun was when the opponent expected Toroville or something, and then he got burned completely. It also helped because Squirtle had so many powerful golds that Shiro was rarely used, so it worked more often than not. He also won me one game because the opponent wanted to play his final card instead of passing. Sadly, I didn't record at that time, so I don't have the footage, but yeah, Shiro is the main reason why I had so much fun with playing that deck. So at number 4 it was the deck from my first video that got 1000 views. It is my most disliked video because I thought at the time that the deck was OP and put OP in the title, but the deck really wasn't that OP. It was still pretty strong, just not OP. The deck is a Moonlight deck from open beta. It's no secret that I always liked weather, and Moonlight is basically positive weather. It is a reverse version of the first deck that I ever made in the Gwent The Witcher card game, and the deck was also used a bit of fog to have some damage, and I was also able to get +8 points per turn. That made the deck really strong in a long round. It could also easily counter weather decks since it overrode weather. Also may I say that the Moonlight effect in open beta looked really beautiful. At number 3 I decided to put Combic Queensguard deck from open beta. The deck basically buffed the base strength of Queensguards, who resurrected all the copies of Queensguard for a powerful finisher. And Combi had the ability when it died, it basically burned the whole board and spawned 20 strength Hamdol on the opponent's side. Because the deck had low plays, Combi really helped you way more than damaged you. You were also able to play a few Deathwish cards to resurrect when they got burned, and at the end you could play 30+ point Queensguard, and if all worked out, the opponent stood almost no chance of winning. The problem was that the opponent usually knew he had to play around Combi, and it wasn't really that hard since Combi and late Queensguards were the only power play of that deck, and you had to set it up first. But it was really fun just because it was really hard to pull off, and it was much more satisfying because of it. And for number 2 is probably the deck that I missed most from the closed beta, and that is the spy deck. You basically had the leader who seized all the spy units from the opponent, and also Mano who destroyed all of the spy units. You also really only had Imperial Brigade, which buffed itself for spy units, and other than that there were only spying units. Usually the game was mostly played on the opponent's side, and that was probably the most interesting spy version. Especially the lethal finisher when he absorbed the 2 units on the right and 2 on the left, usually used on the opponent's side, and then you either burnt him with Mano or transformed into silver because golds were unaffected at that time, and then stole him back with Calvet, which was the leader back then. It was also fun to watch, coming from only a few points to around 100 in one card, and the opponent losing as many points. The deck was also more of a meme, but like Combi, when it worked, it was also an amazing feeling. Now before the number 1, I think it's time for some honorable mentions. And finally, for number 1, it is the deck that is very special to me due to being my first deck ever made, and that is Wild Hunt Frost Fog deck. Arguably a Wild Hunt deck with ships from open beta was maybe a bit more fun, but this deck was the deck I used my first resources to finish it, and it was really fun to play because of the reasons like weather. It also got me to the rank 15, which was the highest at that time. It also really helped the deck that it was the dwarf meta with high units and resilience, but the weather reduced all units to 1 strength, so it was kind of a counter to them. All the units in this deck were also immune to weather, so it didn't work on yourself, and the deck was also used foglets for value generation. And because of all these things and the deck being very special to me, I think it deserves number 1 spot. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys maybe with more top 10s if I decide to make them, and with Cyberpunk and other stuff.